Hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 82 of Humanity vs. Insanity, the Crane Report. Well, the title of tonight's programme is Tangled Webs. And of course, that's taken from the infamous phrase of, "Oh, what tangled webs we weave when we first practice to deceive." And whilst a lot of people actually believe that's taken from Shakespeare, it's actually, I believe it's Marmion of Walter Scott. But that is the case, and of course it refers to the lies and the deceit that we bring into play to cover our real motives. And of course that certainly applies in the bigger arena right now. But before I introduce tonight's guest, I just want to say a word of thanks to all the people who have donated and supported me over the last few weeks. Let me just say that obviously it is even a small donation made on a regular basis makes a massive difference. It's primarily fuel costs. I'm covering in excess of 3,000 miles a month to get up and down the country to attend various events. And this past week, I spent 3 days in a independent police complaints commission hearing, which we'll be talking about in greater depth on Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock tonight. But tonight, let's go back and look at these tangled webs. And it's with my great pleasure that I welcome back to the show Mel Kelly from north of the border. Mel's up there on the west coast of Scotland and doing some literally sterling work in digging beneath the veneer that's presented as politics, both national and international. So Mel, good evening.
Good evening, Ian.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Excellent, excellent. Now, Mel, you sent me a document the other day, which certainly caught my attention. And you know, you've obviously been doing a little bit of your own research, which is fantastic, because you know this is what we always encourage people to do their own research and come to their own realization of what's actually happening in the world. Because you know, obviously, fortunately, more and more people, as we'll see later, are not just parroting what they see in the mainstream media. And this was the document. And what we're going to do is we're going to work through this this document in just a second. But Mel, first of all, what motivated you to spend the time in doing the research and then putting this this chart together?
Well, we've all heard of the expressions Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, One World Government, and the question's always asked, how can this possibly be put together? I mean, how can you have one world government? And I was told that after Nicola Sturgeon became First Minister, the BBC told us she'd went to America and everybody loved her because she went to appear on The Daily Show. But then I discovered that no, she actually went to give a speech to an organisation called the Council on Foreign Relations. And I've watched the speech, and she starts off by saying what a respected organisation, what a pleasure it is to speak to them. And so I thought, well, who is this organisation? Went to their website, and lo and behold, it was set up by David Rockefeller, CEOs of AIG, Lehman Brothers. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, are they not the people that caused the financial crash? And Nicola's saying they're a respected organisation. I thought, this needs to look further than this.
So let me ask you, Mel, was this the first time you'd come across the Council on Foreign Relations?
Yes, it was.
Okay, excellent.
So I decided to look at on their website, see who's involved. So at the top of the tree is David Rockefeller, the CEOs of AIG and Lehman Brothers, and Madeleine Albright, would you believe? And then you look at staff, and Obama's chief of staff works for David Rockefeller and the people that caused the financial crisis. His chief assistants also work for him. And then you have various heads of security, heads of their ex-state members for Reagan and Bush. And if we look at all the changes, we can look back to Thatcher and Reagan. And this is where all the changes seem to happen about we've all got to let private corporations run everything. We've got to sell off state assets. So this Council on Foreign Relations goes way back to Reagan and Thatcher. Now, also on the Global Advisory Board, we have a member of the House of Lords who just happened to be the advisor to Thatcher and Blair. So there's the tie right back to Thatcher and Reagan and the bankers that caused the financial crisis, or the so-called financial crisis. So we have got a member of the House of Lords working with David Rockefeller. Nicola Sturgeon goes running, but she's following in the footsteps to pay homage to these people because Thatcher did it and Blair did it too. So when you look at the staff, it goes on to say that national intelligence officers in the NSA and senior members of the American Armed Forces, both Army, Air Force and their Navy, then they've got to go and do fellowships and spend a year working for the Council on Foreign Relations. Now we're talking about the people that lead NATO. So he's got the President's staff in his pocket, he's got NATO in his pocket, he's got the NSA in his pocket. Then you move along and Kofi Annan is on his Global Advisory Board and various people from Russia and China. And then you have a very interesting organisation, the Group of 30 on the Global Advisory Board. Who is that? That is the chairman of the Fed, the presidents of the European Central Bank, and 28 other central banks around the world. And then you also have the chairman of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, two chairmen of the Bank of International Settlements, the chief economists of the IMF, and who else in that particular section? Then you've got, the World Bank and the former president of Mexico. Don't know why he's in the Group of 30. So basically he's got the president's staff, NSA staff, the senior leaders of the American military, which means NATO. He's got the bankers, Kofi Annan, a member of the House of Lords, various corporate CEOs, and that's his global advisors. And then the members, well, no surprise, heads of casino banks, private banks, high street banks, the global CEOs of the hedge funds and other corporations, that includes Soros. And then you've got religious advisory committee with Muslims and Christians and you name it, and they're there. So basically, the people that run the world isn't the governments as we would be led to believe in the West, because all of them seem to be in David Rockefeller and the bankers that caused the financial crisis pockets, and they are below them. And so you look on the website and there's a very interesting piece called Global and Regional Governance. And this is where these people fit in. David Rockefeller at the top, they all answer to him. And all countries should just be regions where the people at the top of his organisation control all the money globally, all armies via NATO globally, all trade, and that's what your TTIP and everything's about, all laws, because the American president, and it looks like now all your global advisors are underneath him, religious leaders. But then when you look further, there just happens to be in 2007, now we have been told we are getting taken out of Europe. We were told Brexit is happening. What they've not told us is, in 2007, the Queen's Privy Council members set up an idea of, let's set up a shadow EU, one that's not elected by anybody, one that nobody in the country's told about, no reference made to this when they talked about Brexit. And this is called the European Council on Foreign Relations. So this is the subsidiary that is to answer to David Rockefeller and the guys that caused the financial crisis. Now, what actually happened was top members of the Tory party and some of the most powerful companies in the world set up an organisation called the Centre for European Reform. And if you look on WikiLeaks and Wikibooks, you'll be able to find this. Now, I'll give you the people that fund it first. So the Tories have been set up this Centre for European Reform, and the funders are Accenture, Access Industries, APCO Europe, AstraZeneca, BAT, Boeing, BP, British Bankers Association, BT, Citigroup, Clifford Chance, the Daily Mail, Deutsche Bank, EDS, The Economist, Euromoney, the German Marshall Fund of the US, GlaxoSmithKline, Goldman Sachs, Group 4, G4S, JP Morgan, KMPG, Lockheed Martin, Merck, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Rolls-Royce, Telecom Italia, Tesco, Thales, Royal Bank of Scotland, Time Warner Europe, UBS, Unilever, and UPS, United Parcel Services. All names that we all know. What is a public bank doing funding a Tory, let's reform the EU think tank? And there's people from The Economist involved. But the advisory board in 2002, the chairman of AstraZeneca, the former dean of INSEAD, I think that's one of the European universities. Yep. There's always universities involved. Former vice chairman of Goldman Sachs, would you believe? Nick Butler of BP, Lord Ralph Haranoff, the former warden of St Anthony's College, Oxford, with close ties to MI6.
So, Mel, with the Council on, with the Centre for European Reform, one would ask the question: why do you think it is that there are so many British companies, or British-based companies, most of them are global, of course, and British politicians were on this body when basically the people voted to get out of the EU? And yet here it is, the Centre for European Studies, basically looking at integration.
Yeah, well, basically this Centre for European Reform, now we've got the chair of Quintech in there. Now that's the company that right now is controlling the drones in the NATO exercises in the North Sea. So we have got the military involved in this. And that's a private company. We've got the Carlyle Group involved. John Major went to work for them. He was their European head. Ian Hargreaves. I mean, the list here is shocking. This looks like a complete alternative EU that has been set up in secret with MI6 involved and the military involved, Tory MPs involved, all funded by like G4S, Goldman Sachs, Royal Bank of Scotland. Well, I mean, how can the Royal Bank of Scotland afford to fund them? Because they're a public company that we are told is absolutely bankrupt. Now, the Centre for European Reform is involved in setting up the alternative EU, is what I see it as, the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs, of Rockefeller's Global Corporation. And the European Council on Foreign Relations, we have got, you go onto their website and you go into Council, and I wonder who's the council. I wonder who are the people that we didn't elect, that the Tories picked and these corporations picked, to be a subsidiary of the one world government that's being operated in America right now. And you have got sitting MPs from the Labour Party and the Tory Party. You have former MPs that the people have rejected at the ballot box. You have got Labour's ex-head of the Lords. So we have got private corporate boards, we have got the military involved, we've got Tory MPs orchestrating this, and the list of members on here, I mean, it beggars belief. You've got George Robertson,
former head of NATO, of course. Yes, then he went and some very interesting connections with Dunblane as well.
Yep. And then you've got Douglas Alexander. Now, wait a minute. Douglas Alexander was rejected in Paisley, and the people elected Mary Black. So, I mean, before I give you the list, here's the list of countries in the European Council for Foreign Relations. Let's see how many we recognise from the EU. Albania, Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Macedonia, Malta, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland. Well, they're not in the EU, but they like being in this alternative EU that no one elects. The Netherlands, Turkey, and last on the list, the United Kingdom. There are members of the Queen's Privy Council on this, various members of the Queen's Privy Council. So we've got Douglas Alexander, rejected as an MP at the ballot box. Charles Clarke, who's another ex-Labour, New Labour MP. Ian Clarkson, he's of Brightfield Consulting. Oh, he's on the board of an academy chains. You've got a diplomat, former councillor at the European External Action Service, Robert Cooper. Flick Drummond, sitting Tory MP, that tells everybody, well, we want out of Europe. And here, the Tories are taking you out. We'll respect the people's vote. And Flick Drummond is sitting in this secret EU that's been set up by the Tory party. Andrew Duff, former Lib Dem, member of the European Parliament. Timothy Ash, Oxford University, that wrote a book that it should be one world and one government. We have Charles Grant, the director for the Centre of European Reform that we were speaking about first. Damien Green, the current Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Surely that job's keeping him busy enough. How can he be in an EU-type secret shadow body when he's meant to be running the Department of Work and Pensions right now? And we have Joe Johnson, MP, Minister for Universities and Science. We have a professor from the London School of Economics, Mark Calder. We've got Mark Leonard, Director of European Council and Foreign Relations. Now, there's a young fella, and I mentioned earlier, Charles Grant, Centre for European Reform. Guess who mentored him? Why, it was Tony Blair. So I guess that's Blair's man. So he's in the Centre for European Reform with the Tories, and he's in this new EU. And he's just a student that's only ever worked setting up scams like this. Then we have the director of Save the Children. So charities on there as well.
And of course, save the children actually means traffic the children.
Yep, campaigns director, Kirsten McNeil. Nobody's ever elected her, but she sits with her MPs, old MPs, NATO. the President and CEO of International Rescue Committee, David
I
Miliband.
thought that was the Tracy's, wasn't it? International Rescue.
So here we have David Miliband told us he was retiring from politics. He was now going to work for charity. No, he was already sitting on this new shadow EU called the Centre for European Reform. No one's elected him like Douglas Alexander. Why is he working with sitting MPs from the Tory party and all these people? Because we were told he's doing charity work. Well, this doesn't look like charity to me. Director of Global Partners and Associates, Andrew Puddlefat. Emma Reynolds, Member of Parliament, former Europe Minister.
Okay, Mel, now listen, before we go through the entire list, is this all available? Is this accessible on the Centre for European Reform website?
Yep.
Okay.
www.ecfr.eu. Look at the council. Last two I'll say. Rory Stewart, Minister of State, Department for International Development. Chaka Amuna, Member of Parliament that resigned from the Shadow Cabinet because Corbyn got elected. And Janet Royal, the Member of the House of Lords, former leader of the opposition. So we've got in the Global Council for Centre for European Centre, we have got a member of the House of Lords, and here's another member of the House of Lords sitting at the European level. So to me, this looks like a shadow EU that's been set up by Liberal, Tory and Labour MPs, people connected with Tony Blair, members of the House of Lords, and a few of those people I've mentioned are member of the Queen's Privy Council.
Okay, so what we've got...
There is no Brexit.
Yeah, there is no Brexit. Exactly. There is no Brexit. And this is kicking the can down the road. So what you've uncovered here, and in your chart, I mean, and obviously it's a work in progress, but what you've shown is your take on the groupings and where this is heading. Now, ultimately, what you've said at the bottom of your page is all humanity move to and living in each Council on Foreign Relations human region. So what do you mean by that?
If you look at Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, these corporations and these bankers and these politicians want to clear the people off the land so that corporations can do what they want without being regulated. But unfortunately, you've got humanity living on the land that they want. So what the agreement is, they'll all work together and they'll put into effect different operations. Oh dear, there's flooding. Well, that's because the American Army and Air Force are controlling HARP, and that's what's warming up the atmosphere. It's actually the EU state HARP is a weapon of war. It is manipulating the climate. So you have got all these people manipulating the climate together. They are actually clearing the people off the land so that oil companies and frackers can move in, and they'll just put us into ghettos. The same way as they practiced in Germany. That was the first practice run. The second practice run was Palestine. That was them trying to do it for an entire country. Now these people are working together to have unelected bodies like the Centre for the European Council for Foreign Relations. They'll orchestrate getting us out of the cities and putting us into little ghettos, the way they've treated the people of Palestine. And then you've got the Global Centre, Council for Foreign Relations, and they control the President's office and the staff. They control NATO. So while the new European Council on Foreign Relations, they'll make sure and they'll orchestrate it at European level, and then their armies will be used by NATO on behalf of the Council of Foreign Relations and David Rockefeller to do the same across the rest of the world. Look at what's happening in Iraq. Look at what's happening in Syria. Look what's happening in Libya.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that in a second. I mean, you're absolutely right. In the US, if you look at a map of particularly the western United States, the federal government is securing as much land as it possibly can via the Bureau of Land Management. And obviously what they're doing is they're working eastwards on that. As you rightly say, they drive people into the conurbations. But in the UK, people are being driven out of the cities because the cities are being gentrified. So, people who perform the sort of basic services are actually having to travel quite some distance. And in fact, Boris Johnson, realising that people were being forced out because obviously property developers wanted to take advantage of particularly Russian and Chinese money that was flooding into the city to get the highest prices they could for rents, forcing out social housing, or shutting down social housing and forcing the people out. So how does that work? Because that seems a little bit contradictory, that on one level they're trying to get people into the cities, but then what we see in the UK is effectively people being forced out of the cities as they become gentrified.
Well, basically what they're doing is using every worker's money to make the cities the playgrounds of the elite. So that's why they want another Heathrow runway, because basically the cities are to be the domain of the global elite. And what they're doing is, I saw an example of this. I was up in Aberdeen a few weeks ago, and on the way out I noticed that they're building what you could call as just groups of houses. And if you're lucky, there's a community centre there. You're lucky if there's a shop. There's no amenities. And they're building houses outside the city, boxes. And everybody, the government will help you buy them. And that gets you out of the city, so that the bankers, and what's happening is the bankers are actually pricing us out of the cities because they control house prices, so they just inflate them so that we're priced out of being able to buy in the city. And the government tells you, we'll help you buy a little box in the outskirts of the city. And of course, what they'll have is dual carriageways that don't have proper connections to these little boxes. And like Palestine, the first practice ground, what you will see is already in Scotland, now things are moving fast. In December, would you believe the chief NATO officer in Britain, who is the chief surveillance officer, advisor to the White House in Westminster on Palestine, he has been put in charge of all public transport in Edinburgh, our capital city where our parliament is. Why would the most senior NATO man be put in charge of all public transport in our capital city? Add that to Humza Yousaf, Scotland's new transport minister, announced a few weeks ago. Look, by 2018, we're going to stop people driving in the cities. Only those we give a green sticker will be allowed to drive. What excuse did he give? It's all about car emissions and your health. Well, we all know all the car companies have been caught lying about car emissions, so it definitely isn't about car emissions. That's the equivalent of saying in Nazi Germany, you've got the right sticker, you can do it, you've not got that sticker, so you ain't driving into that city. So are the people that don't have the green stickers going to get a yellow star? When you've got the military has taken over Scotland's public sector transport and capital, and the transport minister saying they're going to start by 2018, stop people driving in Scotland's cities, then here you see it, the ghettoisation, the way they did in Palestine, because that's exactly what happens. If you're an Israeli, you can use the roads 24/7. If you're a Palestinian, you've got to queue up for 23 hours. You need to look at what these people are doing, not what they say.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, last week I actually mentioned Saeed Yavid, who is the Communities Minister, he of the one who took the decision to overrule Lancashire County Council. last week, and he took a trip to Israel. So here's a Muslim taken on a trip to Israel by the conservative Friends of Israel, and comes back, and at a dinner a few months later says that if he had to live in the Middle East, he would choose Israel so that his children could experience freedom and liberty. So we can see that the tentacles go very deep. Now, Mel, just go back to Agenda 21. Do you know who the author of Agenda 21 was?
None other than the United Nations.
Well, no, it was actually Maurice Strong. It's an individual called Maurice Strong. And if you do a little bit of research on Maurice Strong, he was a crook and a half. In fact, I think he was he had to live out much of his life in China, I believe, because he was actually wanted in the US. But it's also alleged that he was partnered by Gorbachev in writing Agenda 21, and of course it was adopted at the I think it was called the Earth Conference, if my memory serves me correctly, back in 1992, and it was adopted effectively as a global policy. So you're right, it was adopted effectively by the UN, and that's why a lot of local councils actually have committees set up to address what they call local Agenda 21, which is to make sure that, and there's many of these around the country, but if you are concerned about your local council and its adherence to Agenda 21, and the I think it's 263 pages or something. It's 42 chapters. It's a few years since I read it now, but as you rightly say, it is the blueprint, and what you're uncovering here is the interconnectivity that is being set up. It's also what's also happening, Mel, is that no one body actually has responsibility for anything, so that you can actually spread the responsibility, spread the blame, but of course you never actually identify where the buck stops. I just want to take the opportunity to share and show some of the machinations which have occurred over the past, few decades to get to this point. Because what you have identified, Mel, is the fact that this agenda is extremely advanced. Not as advanced as they intended it to be, and that's why Agenda 2030 has effectively superseded Agenda 21, because they know they can't achieve what they wanted to achieve by 2021. But think tank documents are always a great place to start, and that's why the Centre for European Reform, Council on Foreign Relations, and I'm also going to mention the Trilateral Commission in a second. But these are good places to start. But then we have spin-offs, and probably one of the most significant documents of the last 20-odd years is this one. This is Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces and Resources for a New Century. Now, PNAC, or the Project for a New American Century, is no more. It effectively disbanded about a decade ago. But it was a neocon group that came together during the latter part of the Clinton years in an attempt to force Clinton, Bill, that is, of course, to effectively become more aggressive in establishing the US as the dominant superpower. But even PNAC took its inspiration from other sources, and one of the most significant sources of inspiration. Does this guy look human to you? This is Zbigniew Brzezinski, and certainly, as you're going to see, his attitude, his mentality is not what we would consider to be human. Are you familiar with Zbigniew Brzezinski, Mel? I'm taking you into new territory. Okay.
Yeah, I look forward to this.
Okay, with Zbigniew Brzezinski, he wrote a number of books. Bill Clinton didn't like him. And so Bill Clinton sort of forced him back into academia. But of course, his claim to fame goes back to the late 60s. And I'll show you what got him onto the Rockefeller payroll. And of course, he's been very well taken care of since then. But the book that was the inspiration for that PNAC think tank document was this one, which he wrote in 1997. called the Grand Chessboard. And you can see there that, this is basically Central Asia. And he always identified that ultimately, control of the planet would come down to who controlled Central Asia. And so everything that we've seen unfolding over the past 20 years has been about creating the baseline to enable the globalists, i.e. those under David Rockefeller and co. Well, these are the names that we know. There's probably some hidden players there. But so that they can prepare the board for their final move, which of course is to take over this region. And of course, this is really what Syria is all about right now. Now, Brzezinski was a very interesting player. And back in the day, back in the sort of, I want to show you something that is an interesting dichotomy, because in his earlier days, and some might argue this is true now, but he said most Americans are close to total ignorance about the world. They are ignorant. That is an unhealthy condition in a country in which foreign policy has to be endorsed by the people if it is to be pursued. And it makes it much more difficult for any president to pursue an intelligent policy that does justice to the complexity of the world. Well, in the Grand Chessboard, he actually makes the statement that is effectively parroted, not quite verbatim, but almost, in this document, Project for a New American Century, Rebuilding America's Defenses. And this is the infamous quote from this document. It says, further, the process of transformation, i.e. America becoming the superpower. That's actually a Brzezinski term, the superpower. Further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And of course, 9/11 was really all about providing the springboard for this policy, this globalist policy, to get kicked off, because they knew very well that the American public would never support such an overtly aggressive policy. And this journalist, I think he was first and foremost, although he was also a geopolitical analyst, Roel Mark Gerecht, he was part of PNAC, and he said, we have no choice but to reinstill in our foes and friends the fear that attaches to any great power. Only a war against Saddam Hussein will decisively restore the awe that protects American interests abroad and citizens at home. I mean, this is outrageously arrogant. It also goes to show that basically these people will do whatever it takes, and this is going to be endorsed as we go through this. By the way, I just want to show you this. This is the back page of the PNAC report that talked about needing a new Pearl Harbor to kick this agenda off. And I think there's 26 names on that list, and 13 of them, bear in mind this document was published in September of 2000, 2 months before the election of that year, and in January when George W. Bush was sworn in on the White House lawn as President of the United States, despite the fact that Al Gore won hands down. 13 of the people on that list were appointed into George Bush's government. Well, here's another great quote from Brzezinski. But again, this is interesting because this is from the 1970s. And he said, shortly, the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information they've been given on the previous night's news. So in the 1970s, he was of the opinion that basically they were well down the road to dumbing down the population and literally just being able to sort of feed into their minds some trite statement that they wish them to parrot and that they wouldn't think about it. But interestingly, a few years ago, in fact, I think it's 2008, he had a change of heart. In fact, it is 2008, and this is from a speech that he gave at Chatham House in London. And he said, major world powers, new and old, also face a novel reality. While the lethality of their military might be greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historic low. So here we are 40 odd years later, and Brzezinski is actually acknowledging that one of the biggest problems, the biggest stumbling blocks to establishing their hegemonic agenda is the political awakening that is occurring. He goes on, to put it bluntly, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people than to physically kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. And the prima facie evidence that the wider public are not just taking the news and parroting it is this, which is looking at the downturn in the sales of daily papers in the country. And The Sun, which I have often jested, is the most influential paper in the country because it's read, allegedly, by about 13 million people. And that's based on numbers of copies sold and then 3 or 4 people reading every copy because you take it home and it gets read by the family. But literally in the last 6 years, sales of The Sun have reduced from just over 3 million down to 1.78 million people. It's a phenomenal drop. I mean, it's a drop of more than 30-odd%. But every single paper, with the exception of the Eye, and that's interesting because, of course, that's like YouTube. It's like YouTube in print. It's a snapshot. But with the exception of the Eye, every other daily paper has had a reduction in sales. And the most significant is The Independent, which in 2010 had 185,000. And as of this year, to date, is averaging 55,000. So that's, is down to less than 30% of what the sales were 6 years ago. And this is very, very telling because this is indicative of the fact that people are no longer relying on the mainstream for their information. They're coming to alternative sources, which is why, of course, the establishment is so concerned about the alternative media. Currently, it desperately tries to ignore it, even though it knows that more and more of its journalists are actually turning to the alternative media for their information. And then they're going away and doing their research, and then they're sanitizing it because they know they can't get a verbatim report from the alternative media into the mainstream, although it has been known. So they sanitize it, and that's the only way. In fact, those papers that are getting closer and closer to the real truth are those that are actually managing to hold on to their sales. And interestingly, one of those is the Daily Mail. It has lost sales. It's lost about 500,000 over the past 6 years, but percentage-wise, it's actually lost less than many of the others. By the way, the Evening Standard has gone up, but that's a free paper. Okay, now just go back to Brzezinski because Brzezinski wrote this seminal book in 1969. It was published in 1970, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. A book that was very difficult to get hold of, but fortunately there are PDFs available of it now online. But this is an extract from that book. And listen very carefully to what he's saying here. Another threat, less overt but no less basic, confronts liberal democracy. More directly linked to the impact of technology, it involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled and directed society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite whose claim to political power would rest on alleged superior scientific know-how. And this is the key bit. Unhindered by the restraints of traditional liberal values, This elite would not hesitate to achieve its political ends by using the latest modern techniques for influencing public behaviour and keeping society under close surveillance and control. Under such circumstances, the scientific and technological momentum of the country would not be reversed, but would actually feed on the situation it exploits. Well, it was this book that got Zbigniew Brzezinski in the presence of Rockefeller, and Rockefeller effectively took him on the payroll, and then between the two of them, they founded the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission is another part of the web that you've started to uncover there, Mel. Now, many of you will have seen Adam Curtis's new documentary, which I think was called something like Hyperdimensionality, where he was talking about how the political arena is deliberately kept so confusing that most people just go, or simply just go, can't be bothered. Well, there is another individual who was extremely prescient. And I'm going to just read a short extract from Beyond a Pale Horse, which was written by Bill Cooper and published in 1991. And this is from page 177. Bill Cooper writes, "Can you imagine what would happen if Los Angeles is hit by a 9.0 quake, New York Center is destroyed by a terrorist-planted atomic bomb, World War III breaks out in the Middle East?" Yeah, right, any day now. "The banks and the stock markets collapse, extraterrestrials land on the White House lawn, food disappears from the market, some people disappear, the Messiah presents himself to the world, all in a very short period of time. Can you imagine? The world power structure can and will, if necessary, make some or all of these things happen to bring about their new world order." And of course, sadly, I have to say that Bill Cooper, who basically predicted the events of 9/11 in June of that year, June of 2001, and he was actually ended up being shot by an Arizona state trooper in November of 2001. I guess that they decided that as they were going to basically pursue precisely the agenda that Bill Cooper had exposed, they needed him out of the way. And none other than David Rockefeller, which is pretty much where we started this, Mel. He says, "We are on the verge of global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." And Mel, when I saw your chart, I thought, okay, this is fantastic because you are doing exactly what we encourage people to do, which is to do their own research, do their own digging, and start to understand for themselves how these tangled webs work. They work to keep people confused so that people can't see the bigger picture. If you think you've identified somebody who's got some responsibility for something, the reality is it won't be the right person because they make sure that nobody has responsibility for anything. It's just one massive clusterfuck. So does that sort of fall into place for you, Mel? Oh, I can't hear you. Mel, I can't hear you.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah, a very highly... It's like a big spider's web.
Absolutely.
And all you need in a spider's web is the right spider at each crossroads. And it's a spider's web where lots of spiders live, and the spiders are of different nationalities, but they've all got one common language. Greed, insatiable greed. And it's a language that only they speak. It's a philosophy that all of them share. Being a consummate liar. I mean, the way I see it is, we had the madness of King George, and it's like that sort of madness that we're told gonorrhea brings on. And to me, it's like, really, that's what these people act like. It's like they've been infected with gonorrhea. And insatiable greed seems to have the same effect, where they're completely and utterly, totally deluded, delusions of grandeur. They will lie, steal and cheat from millions. They'll drop bombs and tell you that that's them doing peacekeeping. And it's like living in Alice in Wonderland, where BBC News is like the caterpillar smoking through a bubble pipe and telling you, here's the world today. And it's like, I think I'm Alice. Surely everyone watching the TV is Alice and going, what the?
Well,
But when you actually start to look at how the spider's web is interlinked. So in Britain, you've got the Queen's Privy Council sitting at the top. Then you have, they now serve on the European Council of Foreign Relations, which serves the Council of Foreign Relations in America. And you just move down the tree, but what you're seeing is the unelected replacing the elected. And that to me is what this European Council on Foreign Relations is. The Tory party, funded by the biggest corporations in the world and Royal Bank of Scotland, have set up an alternative EU with other countries, with people nobody elected, to sit there and work together and collude against the nations.
And the thing is, it's to some extent, it's always been there, but now it's overt. Now it's in your face. And by the way, if you want to go above the Council on Foreign Relations, then the one book that I would absolutely recommend is The Committee of 300, written originally by Dr. John Coleman in 1986, but he republished it in 2006. Now, you have to remember that in 1986, that was before the days of the internet. So, the first publication was literally hard research. By 2006, he'd had the luxury of the internet for a few years, and he'd made a number of amendments. And I think the 2006 version, whilst I may not necessarily agree with everything, but I think the 2006 version is a seminal work. But now we're over time. So I just wanted to close with the observation here that, the political shenanigans is a total charade. And of course, nowhere else in the world right now is that charade being played out on a bigger stage than in the US. And a few days ago, we had the third presidential debate. And I was watching it live, and I couldn't help but notice that Hillary Clinton kept looking down. I mean, I was expecting her to do a bit of the Obama, as she was taking the prompts from the teleprompter. But she just kept looking down. And eventually, we got this screen grab from there. And look, she has a prompt. She has a PC prompt here. Meanwhile, her opponent does it the hard way. Because if there is a screen here, and it looks like there might be a screen, it's not on. And to be honest, Donald Trump was not at the top of his game. I think that was probably his most lackluster performance, whereas Hillary seemed to be extremely confident. Well, of course, she would be, because she had the advantage over him, because she had a backroom team providing her with the prompts. And George Soros and Barack Obama and other commentators have all made the observation that Donald Trump will win the popular vote, but he will not win the election. Because the US methodology of appointing the president is through an electoral college, although it can be manipulated at so many levels. But the bottom line, the result is already in. Hillary Clinton will be gifted the White House, and Donald Trump, and I think he's probably been told now, he's probably been shown the facts of life, taken down in the basement and shown the real film of what happened at Dealey Plaza in 1963, and then asked if he has any further questions. So, like Al Gore, who won the 2000 election, or John Kerry, who won the 2004 election, Donald Trump will be given some consolation prize so that he goes away quietly and doesn't cause a stink. And of course, all this happens because we let it. The three things that the establishment absolutely rely on us doing or not doing. They don't care which of these labels applies to us: apathy, abdication, or willful ignorance. And abdication suits them fine, because abdication means that we know what's occurring, and we choose to do absolutely nothing about it. And effectively, because of their belief system, they have to tell us what they're going to do, and when we do nothing about it, that's effectively our acquiescence, our acceptance of their outrageous agenda. And that's why, this is humanity versus an insanity. And it's an insanity that is driven from we know not where. And we don't know even the names of the people who are right at the top of the pyramid driving this, but we do know who their henchmen are, and we do know who's at the lower echelons of the pyramid, and those are the people we need to target, and we need to scrutinize their every move, scrutinize our politicians like never before. Now, Mel, we are so far out of time, it's unreal, but thank you so much for joining me tonight. And your chart that you're in the process of working on, like I said, it's a work on progress. Is this on your website?
It's not there yet. I wasn't well last week, but I'll get it up as soon as I can.
Okay, and Mel's website is www.whatthepoliticiansdon'tsay.com. And Mel has some outstanding articles on that website, so please do go take a look, and we'll put that in the blurb beneath the YouTube video. So Mel, thank you once again for joining us. Keep up your research, keep sharing it, and find as many ways as possible to get this information out, because the alternative media, unlike the mainstream where it's all controlled by effectively 6 corporations, the beauty of the alternative media, it is literally millions of us. And even if we have just an audience of half a dozen or so, we're still reaching out to a few people. And that's how we will get this message out. And ultimately, we'll find the catalyst that will bring about the changes that we all know we need to see. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My thanks to Mel Kelly, and I will see you next Monday at 7:30.